Most CEOs think change fails because the organizations resist it. It doesn't. Change fails because the person at the top often had no one to pressure test the plan before it was executed. Welcome to I Communicate. I'm Mark Altman, founder of Mindset Go and your host. My guest knows this from both sides of the
Yep.
table. He's built and sold two law practices. Tom Fafinski is the co-founder of Epic Peer Groups and Virtus Law, a Minneapolis estate planning firm. The firm owners in Epic's benchmarking program have averaged 186% annual revenue growth and 634% annual profit growth over the last 5 years. I mean, digest that for a minute, because I don't know what they're drinking. I want to have a drink of that, though,
It's
whatever it is. So,
pretty.
so
I'll
Tom,
tell you.
welcome to I Communicate.
I tell you what it is. They're drinking from the fountain of laziness, and I
Oh,
kid you not.
we
I
got to
kid you
explore
not.
that.
Fundamental to really accelerate is you've got to become kind of lazy
Hmm.
and find other people to do the stuff that you're doing. And empower them, and then you sit back and you change your role from a doer to a reviewer, and
Hmm.
things explode. But I mean, at the core, you kind of got to be lazy. And
Tom,
you were
what's
talking
the,
about resisting change. That's the change that people have a hard time with.
yeah, it's a great point. I guess I want to clarify. Is it lazy? What's the difference between lazy or delegating?
Well, so I say lazy for shock value. But when somebody says, I want to do peer group, but I just don't have the time. I don't know where I would do it. Like, that's exactly why you need to do peer group, because you should have an abundance of time as a leader of a real enterprise. It's not an enterprise if you're the one that's muddled in the day to day of every aspect of it.
Tom,
So
please,
laziness is
please.
kind of a shock value term, but
Understood. Understood. Tom, on the most recent podcast I did, I was speaking with someone and I said that if I could get everybody in the world in business to ask one question every day, the question I would have them ask is what's in the way? And when I think about what you're talking about right there, yeah, it's either they're too busy or maybe people won't execute the way I execute and letting go of control and so on and so forth. So, what is it, if you could pinpoint in your experience in working with these groups, what is it that, if you could pinpoint really the biggest thing of all, is it time? What else is it?
you mean when they are struggling with something or when they're succeeding?
Well, when they're struggling
Oh,
to let go, when they're
it's the
struggling to
resisting
delegate.
change.
What's
It's
this? Yeah, yeah.
it is they're uncertain. They they fear loss of their identity, and they fear probably embarrassment that other people will become better than they are
Mm.
at parts that they're supposed to be. But a big part of it is identity, actually. It's like that's who they are. I remember back in the early 2000s, I was approached with an offer where I would leave the practice of law and go into the financial world. And it was a very appealing offer. And financially, I probably should have taken it. But when it came right down to it, my identity is I'm a lawyer. That's who I am. I don't want to stop being that. And if you muddle that with being the owner of the business, it's like, okay, well, I'm the owner of this business. I can't stop being the guy that answers or gal that answers the question about what's the next move for sales and marketing. Or like, I'm pretty good at sales. I stink at lead generation. I mean, my lead generation technique is I meet really trusted advisors and I show them the stuff that we can do, and then they refer people to me. And that's great, but I don't know how to go B to C. So if I want to go B to C, I have to hire somebody to go B to C. And when people are resistant to that, like there's going to be somebody else that knows more about a topic in my business than I do. Um,
So, Tom, I want to ask you, there's two things that came to mind as you were saying that. First of all, let's go to the last thing you just said, that people could
yeah,
know more than me and the insecurity around that. One of the things I share with the companies I work with a lot is how do you coach mindset? How do you coach belief systems? Right? So
Yeah.
that's a belief system, like that people are going to become better than me, and where do I fit, and how is my identity, as you said, impacted? So how do you're dealing with someone like that in your peer group, how do you coach them off a belief system? Because that's what it is.
Yeah. And I suffer from I'm not as I mean, you're a coach. I'm a little bit of a coach. I'm a lot of a mentor.
Mm,
I'm a bit of a trainer, and I'm one hell of a consultant. I'll tell you what to do.
that's great.
If you're in my space anyway. But to really be a good leader, you got to be a great, great coach. Um, and you think about the career longevity of a Bill Belichick. Tom Brady was a great player, right? But Bill Belichick was a great coach. I know you're probably a Patriots fan. I'm just
You're
guessing you're a
paving your way
Patriots
to
fan.
my heart right now, Tom. Like you're doing a good job.
Yeah, but I mean, truly, truly, Tom Brady learned how to be a great quarterback by being coached by Bill Belichick. And so many entrepreneurs want to be Tom Brady. But the answer to longevity and really scaling is to be Bill Belichick. Because
Mm,
Tom Brady he wouldn't have been great if he didn't have the other resources around him, if the defense wasn't there, if the receivers weren't there.
mm.
So that, and I struggle with that part too, and I shouldn't. I absolutely shouldn't because coaching is really leading with questions. And the whole lawyer thing is, in law school is all about Socratic questioning. You learn through questions, and that's what an owner has to do. They have to sit back and figure out how they can help somebody discover themselves. The peer groups are really great for accountability, to make sure you're on track, to work with other people who have been similarly situated and figure out how they got their team members there. But it is, yeah, I mean, you got to be a great coach.
Well, so let's go with what you said because I think Bill Belichick actually is a very polarizing figure
Yeah,
in terms
yes,
of, and there's a specific area I want to go here that what I actually loved, and I don't know if this will change how people think of me, but what I loved about Bill Belichick is, boy, the second he found a loophole, he would try to exploit the heck out of that loophole. And for me, when I think of CEOs running companies, the thing I think about is if you step back, if you're not the smartest person in the room anymore, and if you empower those people, you're doing whatever it takes. Like that to me is a form of do whatever it takes to be successful, win, be strategic. So that's the angle that I really like about Bill Belichick. And I think CEOs, I think that's a blind spot, right?
yeah,
Because if you looked at it that way, why not, right?
right, right, exactly. And I'm sure Bill would empower people around him to search for those loopholes.
Right.
And then when they discovered it, he allowed them to own it. And there's something about getting your team members to have the idea rather than you have the idea, because now they own it. They own it. And the part about peer groups that I think is really cool is they you get to a spot where you say, okay, this is what it's going to be, and you have your kind of decision that's there. But then the peer group challenges you to take what are the next steps to implement that decision. And business leaders should do the same thing with their team members. They go on this retreat type of thing and they come to an agreement on stuff, and everybody's like vocalizing the agreement. Lots of times they're just kind of parroting what the owner has said,
Mm.
and being in a, oh yeah, yeah, that sounds great, let's do that. But it doesn't ever get off that agreement stage.
Well,
And
I got to tell you, Tom, you just made me think of something, and I have an analogy for you, and that is that I've been joking with people lately that when you use AI, it is if you pick AI's brain for really simple stuff, it's the ultimate self-esteem builder, right? Like you put a question into AI and like, oh, great question. It's constantly trying to reinforce. And I feel like the analogy there is it's almost like how do you create a team around you that isn't going to be the AI echo chamber and self-esteem builder? And so
Yeah.
to me, right, that centers around, and I'm curious how this comes up in your groups, that centers around the ultimate superpower in leadership, which is psychological safety, which is creating a space where people will feel comfortable speaking their truth and telling you maybe what you don't want to hear. So I'm
Yeah.
just curious, how does psychological safety come up in your groups? And do you think the leaders are that's a strength for them?
Yes, it is. And sometimes it comes up because in the peer group, they'll have like uh, their integrator involved, in the EOS world, another owner involved. And the group will take the side of the integrator and challenge the visionary in what's happening. And that is and the integrator feels safe now because they've got this consensus around the room that what they're feeling is exactly an issue that needs to be addressed. Visionaries, they or the the true business owner, maybe there are other partners involved, but the majority owner or whatever, they make decisions a lot based on the revenue and profits because it has a direct impact on them as individuals, whereas the other folks don't. They're looking at it more about the health of the organization. So I think there's an opportunity to have that check in peer groups, especially to have that kind of checkpoint where the owner doesn't bully the team into something because they're fascinated with the impact on immediate EBITDA. In long term, it
Mm,
probably won't be good for EBITDA if they stay that way. But we've seen that a lot in our peer groups, and
mm,
it's kind of a good thing for the owner to hear the truth spoken by his peers
for
or her
sure.
peers. Yeah,
I I find that there are certain aspects of being an executive that the true cost is very hard to quantify. For example, Um, one of the things that I always find is when you start talking about culture, for example, culture doesn't have a direct attribution to the bottom line. It's got all kinds of tentacles attaching to the bottom line, but it's not like you can say, well, if I improve culture, we're going to immediately make $5 million more. So my question for you is, when you look at the cost of the expression being lonely at the top, and you look at that isolation, loneliness at the top. If you had an executive say to you or CEO say to you, Tom, how do I quantify the cost of resisting that? It's kind of it's a hard argument to make for an exact cost, don't you think?
it is, and you can't vent or explore downward with some things. Some things you can, but there are certain things you just can't explore downward. You don't want your team to get worried. You could talk to your spouse about it, but one of the things about being a business owner is they understand your uncertainty, and if you share too much, like I remember back around 2000, I had my practice. I had a law firm. We had like almost 30 people, and I was miserable. We were doing everything that came through the door, and I'm trying to supervise these lawyers, and I was sitting down with my wife, and I'm much younger at the time, it's 26 years ago, and I said, I don't know if I can do this for 6 more months because I'm just miserable. And you know, that scared her. And it was unfair of me to scare her like that, but it did. What ended up happening was then that's when I said, "Hey, listen, I can't do this. So we've got to narrow our focus and
Mm,
go, the phrase niches to riches." And that's when we serve two client types. We serve MSPs, managed service providers, and we serve uh, mid to higher net worth estate planning clients, many of whom are MSP owners because it's a very lucrative business. And the transition was scary for the family. A couple of years where the revenue was down, but then it was the right decision and had the hockey stick growth afterwards. But you can't burden your family with it. You can't talk, God forbid, you can't go to a competitor and say, "Hey, I'm struggling with this. What do you think?" You know,
Well,
your competitor is going to be like, "What?" And then you don't know if it leaks into the market then. So peer groups are a safe place to talk to people who are identical to you, just not geographically near you.
so Tom, let
Um,
me ask you a question. It's a two-part question. Let me ask you the simple close-ended part first. Would you
yeah,
consider yourself a vulnerable person?
mm, probably not. I wish I was, but probably not.
So
Um,
is it, and the reason I'm asking, because my second question was going to be, I don't think attorneys are typically attributed with the characteristic of being vulnerable. And I
yeah,
think a lot of what we're talking about so far on this podcast is being vulnerable, right?
yeah,
Is being that. And so I'm curious, you were just vulnerable right there. I mean, you
yeah.
just said like that's not really a strength of mine necessarily. So I'm just curious, do you see vulnerability as a critical attribute to the CEO, knowing that one of the ways you overcome change is there's such an element of, I don't know what I don't know, and admitting that. So I'm just curious where vulnerability falls into play for you here.
Well, maybe that's another way of saying laziness because you got to be vulnerable enough to give up the head seat in sales. You got to be vulnerable enough to give up, or maybe not sales. Maybe it's marketing.
Right.
Maybe it's finance. Maybe it's HR. Maybe it's the production of whatever it is your business puts out. Um, if you own that and that's part of who you are and part of who your confidence is, you gotta find a way to give it up. Maybe keep one or two that you're best at. We have this exercise we call it do not do list. I'm a paperless guy, so if you saw my desk right now, you would see no paper.
That's great.
Um, it makes me nervous to have paper there.
Mm.
But when I'm feeling overwhelmed and I'm not having a lot of free time, I put a pad of paper on my desk with a pen, just like a notepad. And on the top, in caps, I put do not do. And I go through my day and list the things that I did that I shouldn't be doing, that somebody else could do at 30, 40, $50 an hour, something like that. My hourly rate is $610 an hour when I'm a lawyer. So if I am previewing my emails, I'm paying somebody $610 an hour to do that. Um, so I've worked at it. It's more of a discipline than it is a natural instinct or whatever. But I have turned over my inbox to my assistant to preview so that I'm only working on the most important things. I, delegate work, and it is vulnerable. You want to be the best at everything you're doing, but you gotta expose it a little bit
I
and be willing.
wonder, go, you please keep going. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh no, you have to be willing to let others contribute, willing to well, here's the thing about employees. They have, and this was a recruiter explained. One of the great things about being a peer group is you hear opinions from all different industries because I'm
Mm.
in an industry specific peer group with Epic with estate planning, and then I'm in a non-industry specific one through an organization locally here called Allied Executives. Um, but there's a spectrum. There's adventure and there's fear, and every employee falls somewhere in that spectrum.
Mm.
If they're the ones that want the high base and are willing to forego a bonus, and they are working at big companies or working for government where there's civil servant protection, civil servant, they are on the fear side. They want certainty. They don't want to have risk. And then if you look at, folks like you and I, probably we're way over here on the adventure side. We need to have that juice in our life. We need that energy. And so the employees that work for you, they're not going to be on the adventure side. They're not going to be on the fear side because as a smaller organization, if they truly were motivated totally by fear, they would go work for, one of the big Fortune 500s or the government or something like that. So they have adventure in their life. It's just not what's driving them, but they're not all the way over to here. And in fact, I don't think we should hire people that are all the way over to here. We can get in here this range and kind of give them a share of like phantom equity and synthetic equity where they feel like they're the owners, maybe even a minority partnership. But we got to realize that the people that we hire in smaller organizations under 20 million in revenue, they truly are seeking some adventure, just not necessarily full adventure. So you find that spot. They're there because they want something different in the world. Normally, it's not economics. Normally, it has something to do with like owning a particular area.
Hmm.
They want to be the person that, like, I bring on younger attorneys and I'm working on, really complicated succession plans, and they love the fact that they're involved. And they're not motivated by the money. I mean, you got to pay them, but they're not motivated by the money. Otherwise, they would have gone to a much larger firm. So if we figure that out and we realize, okay, I have to be vulnerable enough to give up some stuff and give it to somebody else so that they have adventure in their life, so that they have excitement, so that they're important. I am losing a little bit of my identity when it comes to marketing, for instance. Like I've long since learned, like, I'm not good at lead generation. It's been a long time since I've done that. I'm good at trusted advisor relationships, but not lead generation. So it would be silly of me to launch a, pay per click or SEO or something and be the guy that's managing that. I don't know anything about that stuff, right? So to give it up to and to give the success to that person too, and to incent them to be successful. So that kind of vulnerability where you're losing a piece of your identity and giving it to somebody else so that they are greater, that's the type of laziness I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? Because, and this is, I don't know, I can't say whether this is an embellishment or not, frankly. I mean, I typically, when I communicate and coach others to communicate, I stay away from absolute language or absolute statements. And I will say that I don't know too many CEOs right now across the country who aren't asking themselves the question, am I keeping up enough with AI? And
Right.
so, whatever your polarizing view, not you, Tom, but whatever a
Yeah.
person's
Right.
polarizing view is an AI, that's fine. But the reality is, virtually every CEO in the country is thinking about it and stressed about it and questioning about it. And so I say that because I just thought of something, Tom, as we're talking about this, is that I wonder that if you're resistant to change, do you have to embrace change? Don't you have to embrace change to accelerate change? Right? Like, how can
Yeah.
you accelerate change without embracing change?
So there's different types of change. Like I'm a person that doesn't really like change that much. But when I talk about change, I'm talking about adding a new service line or moving to a new geography. Um, the tiny incremental changes of, you know, like I remember when we layered probate, which is kind of a natural thing for anybody that does estate planning to do estate administration and probate. When we layered that, I wasn't excited about it, but that's not really change. That's more, you know, incremental migration type of thing. Um, so I personally I don't like change, but I don't look at it as AI as a change. I look at it as like a calculator. Like, and I read this article, Mark, and I wish I could remember where it, and I've searched for it too. I should probably use AI to try to find it. But it was an article about how we are losing technology because of technology. We're losing our soul, and that it's terrible for our society, and it's going to lead to these terrible changes. And at the end, and I'm probably getting this wrong, but and which is probably why I'm not finding it. But at the end, it was an article from like 1912, and it dealt with the calculator, something like, or 1930 or something, and it dealt with the calculator. And when you're reading it, you're thinking, oh, this is about AI, this is about AI, this is about AI. And it wasn't. It was something. So I just look at AI as a tool that will help us be better and accelerate what we can. Do you look at it as a fundamental change?
Yeah, so I see this a little differently than you do. I
Okay.
look at, although I feel like the direction you're going, I like. So I have an expression when it comes to change is most people struggle with change, and the expression is to make change palatable for a lot of people, you have to shift from what I call a daunting to doing mindset. So you take it feels really big and make it small, make it as you like
Yep.
transitional, which is what you're talking about, I feel like. For me, the way I look at change, Tom, is I say to people that if you're asking a human being to do something they're not doing at all, not doing consistently, or not doing well, that's change. And because whether it's behavior change, individual, organizational change, whatever it is, I mean, let's face it, Tom. I mean, there's a lot of people, I don't know about you, but if I have plans to go to dinner with you Saturday night and at the last minute you cancel and you're like, yeah, I'm not going to be able to do that. Well, even like that can be jarring for people because it's just a
Yeah.
change of plans. So I think change, I try not to minimize change even at the levels you're talking about because I just find it's just so hard for so many at all levels of a company from executive on down.
Yeah. So you're coaching your folks to try to like so tell me more about how you that translates into your coaching
Yeah.
of your
Yeah.
customers, clients.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So I use what I call the stages of change model. And the stages of change model has, I'm just going to give the crash course right now, but it has five
Yeah.
stages of change. The lowest level, and Tom, visualize a 0 to 10 scale. Okay.
Okay.
So if you're at zero on a 0 to 10 scale, you're at what we call pre-contemplative. You're not even thinking about the change. You, as the
Right.
CEO, can sit and make the most compelling, influential presentation of why we need to do this,
Yeah.
right? But if I don't see the value in it, if I'm not bought in, if I have change fatigue and like, oh, we've done this before, it's never going to work, then you're at zero, pre-contemplative. The second stage, moving up the ladder, is contemplative, which means you're thinking about it. You're not ready for it. You're not ready to take action, but you're at least thinking about it. The third stage is called preparation, and preparation is on a 0 to 10 scale, like that 5, 6 range. It's where you start to become open minded, to put it in
Hmm.
simple terms. It's when you're like, okay, tell me more, Tom. What are you thinking about here? Why are you thinking about this? Because I'm really starting to consider it and detaching from my fixed mindset and rigidity and then the fourth stage is what's called action. And that is the stage where people are ready to implement the change and do the tactical and strategic things that would make the change successful. And the final of the stages of change is the 10 on the 0 to 10 scale, which is maintenance, which is one of the biggest blind spots I see. Because in my experience, if you are coaching someone or consulting for someone and they're making progress, and they're getting buy-in, but then they have a setback and something happens where they go backwards. Maintenance is what prevents that. Maintenance is the proactive plan to have key milestones and check-ins
Yeah.
so they don't. So that's my methodology, and I always start out the real simple answer to your question is when I'm gauging someone's change readiness, the first question I often ask them is on a 0 to 10 scale, what's the likelihood you're open to this change? And
Yeah.
based on their answer is kind of the design for how I do change management, change communication, and the approach.
Okay. Oh, very good.
Yeah. It's
So it
really
sounds like a bit like every diet I've been on. I can't get past 7. I get there on the agreement. I get there on starting, and then
well, I'm curious. I'll share something with you, and I'm curious your perspective on it because I think that's really very common for most. And
yeah.
I think we get to a place where doing something makes sense.
Hmm.
We know it's the right thing to do and it's sensible, but getting yourself over the hump to actually execute on what you know is the right thing to do, to your point,
Yeah,
is incredibly hard for people.
it is. And peer groups are wonderful for that. And I went through so I mentioned diet and I was kidding, but honestly, one of my peer group members convinced me to go on a that convinced me to investigate the whole food plant-based diet from a health
Hmm.
perspective. And so, I did. And I was like, you know what? This is right. This is the right path to go. Um, be totally plant-based. And that was 3.5 years ago. And one of the reasons why I stay on it and am able to stay on it, because every quarter I see this guy and we check in with each other. He's been on it a lot longer than I am. But the result was, all of my numbers went down from a health perspective. My A1C, my blood pressure, my heart rate, my cholesterol, everything just plummeted. And it's just the right thing to do. But I do need that check-in to kind of keep that, to stay at that 10. And I've
Well,
probably slipped and gone to a little bit of a 9 as I eat some processed food sometimes. But
I want to tell you, first of all, have you ever heard of it? Just as a side note here, have you ever heard of the app called Yuka, Yuka?
no.
So it's an app that I started using about 3 months ago. I saw a story on 60 Minutes about ultra processed foods, which is what led me to. And what it is, Tom, is when you go to the supermarket, you have the app download on your phone and you can scan the barcode on the food you're buying, and it ranks the ultra processed nature of the food from 0 to 100.
Oh,
And I got to tell you, it has changed how I buy food now because
oh,
there were
wow.
foods that I'm buying in the organic section and the healthy section. I'm like, look at me, I'm buying all these. And then I would scan it and it was like 19 out of 100, 24 out of 100. And it really, it's the whole packaging and branding of foods that how it impacts your buying patterns. But I got to
Yeah.
tell you, I highly recommend it. And look, the thing about Yuka is the one point I'd make to our listeners is look, if you go scan um, a package of blueberry muffins, well, of course it's going to be low, like right, like it's sweets, it's carbs, it's
Right.
so don't like expect the unrealistic. I mean, so you still can buy some of those foods if you want, but I am just trying to really be mindful of that ultra processed foods, and I found Yuca's been real helpful.
Oh, good. Have,
Yeah,
have you read the book How Not to Die by Dr. Michael Greger?
I have not.
Oh, it's a good book. If you're interested in
Yes.
longevity and like I want to live because I want to live long, but I also want to be active and be able to, golf and hike and that kind of stuff. And so the How Not to Die book is a great read. I think it's on Audible too. He's a fascinating guy. Does not do it for money. I think he might be out of Boston actually,
Well,
but he does not do it for. Everything is nonprofit. His website is nutritionfacts.org, and it's no corporate sponsorships, and everything goes to. I'm sure he pays himself a salary. But he's a practicing physician, but he really just kind of goes through all the tests that are done across the world from other people, not him, and talks about how it increases your longevity, reduces risk of cancer and heart
hmm,
disease and stroke
that's great.
and diabetes and that kind of stuff. And
That's great.
anyway, you might find that
Yeah, yeah. I made
interesting.
a note of it. All right, Tom, one final thing before we wrap up today. I think it's a perfect way to tackle this last topic. My favorite topic probably to have talk about, participate in, facilitate in general is courageous conversations. When I speak with executive peer groups, that's typically the topic
Yeah.
I often present. And I bring it up because I get a little annoyed and tired of hearing executives throw around the word accountability. Like, I feel like it's like, oh, we got to hold our people more accountable. Our leaders aren't holding everybody accountable. Not because it isn't true. I mean, of course, there's elements of truth to it. I get frustrated because I start with personal accountability. And I think that, the whole premise of leading by example is based on looking inward before you blame outward. And I wonder if courageous conversations, we need our executives to start having better conversations with themselves, right? Like, forget about anybody else. Start being honest with yourself about what's in the way. And I'm curious, do you feel in your experience that executives are good at doing that?
Um, I don't think business owner, I don't know about executives, but business owners are not so good at looking at themselves. We were talking about Bill Belichick and Tom Brady, and you never heard Bill Belichick, after a particularly bad loss, being at the mic and saying, Tom Brady sucked. He didn't do what he was supposed to do. You know,
Never,
because that's not
never.
what real leadership looks like, and so yeah, I mean, in the coaching part, I think peer groups are great. I think they're great for accelerating results. I think they're great for having accountability for moving forward towards a commitment that you've made to yourself. Where it's tangible and people who have no skin in the game are coming back to you and saying, "Where are you at on that? You said you were going to do that and you didn't do it." It's good from a mentoring standpoint because you got other people who've been there and done that. It's not the best from a coaching perspective because there's just not enough time.
Right, right.
Coaching takes time,
It does.
and I think uh, that trait is better served through coaching. That because I think the peer group, we compete with coaching on a expense item,
Mm,
where there's same
I do.
training type stuff.
I do. Yeah,
But we're really not competitors because coaches teach people how to think differently and then
I
teach them
agree.
how to get others to think differently. Um, Whereas the peer group is more like, well, I don't have time to explain to you why you should have a higher revenue per full-time equivalent. But what you need to do is figure out why your team is not getting the same revenue per hands in the cookie jar as it did in the last 3 years, uh, and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think that I don't know if that answers your
Well,
question.
not only did you, I two final thoughts. One is I have seen no bias. I have seen time and time again that the most successful executives do both, right? They have a
They,
peer group
yeah,
and a coach.
right.
And the other thing I would say is you made a point, and I don't want to leave this untouched because it was a critical point you made earlier in the podcast about you find most success when you have an accountability partner. That's what we call it, accountability partner. And that is one of the hugest benefits peer groups. I mean, there's a lot of benefits, but the accountability partner having to look someone in the eye when you were there last month and go, "Hey, this is what I committed to doing." That's huge. And by the way, that's not Tom and I making up. That's science. Like that's
Hmm.
that's that's science proven over time. That's not like
Right.
our opinion. So
Yeah.
I think that's huge. And Tom, I'd love to end
There's a
with
part too where when you write something down,
yes,
because your mind, you always want to be the hero in your story, right? And you
yeah,
always want to
yeah,
be the good guy, right? So when you sit down and say, okay, this year I want to do the following things, and you kind of go through, I want to make this kind of money, I want to add this to my business, um, and you don't write it down. What ends up happening then is you look at it later and you kind of rationalize to yourself and find a way where you're the hero. I worked on an embezzlement um, in 2003 where this guy stole over $1 million from my client, and the client was like a brother to my client. It was like a brother to him. And afterwards, we shut it down. We recovered about half the assets, and he was charged, and part of the deal was he had to explain to us how he stole the money, right? And my client wasn't at a point where he could meet with them. So I was the guy that went and met with him. And I knew the guy really well too. And my kid sat on his lap and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it was crazy what happened. But he sat down and went through it. And his name was Dan. I'm like, Dan, why'd you do this? I don't get it. And he said, I should have been an owner.
Mm,
And I know I don't, it was a tech company. And he's like, I know I wasn't a tech guy, but I should have been treated as an owner.
mm.
And so I took what I think I deserved. And then I stopped when I got there. Like, wow.
Well, and Tom, how often do we see in the world in general when people don't feel like they're treated the way they deserve to be treated, they take the law into their own hands.
Right.
So that, and
Right.
that's and not just in business. We see that all over the place,
It's absolutely true.
right?
So there's something about writing it down that makes you accountable to you. Later on, you go back and you look at it and you say, I wrote this down. This is what I cannot rationalize away from what I wrote down. And then and that whole concept of what gets measured gets done. And now it's now not only is it written down, people are a little reluctant to write it down.
Mm.
Peer group forces you to write it down. It's in the meeting notes. It's the commitments that you declare at the end of your meeting and get checked in on every time we meet, what the status is. So it has this effect where it is forcing you to not forget the stuff that you said you needed to accomplish. Now, maybe it was the wrong stuff and maybe you pivot, during, halfway through, like this isn't working. And through your peer group collaboration, you're able to find a different path, but at least you've written it down.
Well,
And
and
that's
it's
a big part.
yeah, and it's not foolproof. It's a tool. It's
Yeah.
not foolproof. So Tom, final thought today. Could you share if someone is interested in being a part of Epic
Yeah.
peer groups, just let everybody know as we wrap up how they would go about doing that.
Oh, sure. So Epic is you have to be an estate planning law firm owner. I mean, it doesn't have to be exclusively estate planning, but estate planning has to be a big part of what you're doing. And you just email me at tom@epicpeergroup.com. And and if you search my name, it's, a really unusual name. So you're going to find, I think
Well,
there's a couple of Tom Fafinskis, but not in peer group.
and I want to end by saying, I met Tom recently. We had a brief conversation before the podcast, and we're full transparency. We don't know each other super well. What I will say in the limited interactions I've had, and I'm sure you can pick this up from the podcast, very authentic guy, very straight shooter communicator, and I just feel, Tom, I can see why you're really good at what you do, both in law and in the Epic peer groups,
Oh, thanks.
because
Thank you.
you make conversation comfortable, which is huge.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah. So, Tom, thank you so much for joining us for I
Oh, thanks for
Communicate.
having me.
And on behalf of Tom, I'm Mark Altman. We'll see you next time.
Take care.
Take care.